Hi and welcome to today's video by Study Unifies. Today we'll be talking about financial documentation for your journey as an international student. Find out the best ways to arrange your financials so that you can demonstrate that you are a financially viable student. First, let's discuss financial documentation for your US application. In the US, you will have to show some financial documentation before your I-20 is issued. The main financial document is a bank statement with a closing balance in excess of 1 year's full expenditure in the American university you are applying to. This is required for every student, even if you've applied for a scholarship or an assistantship. But during the visa interview, there is no mandatory financial documentation. So, don't take stacks of financial documents when you go for your visa interview to the US Embassy. Take only the most relevant documentation. Also, bring only documents that can be verified. Unverifiable documentation is usually ignored by visa officers. So, what documentation can you take when you go for your visa interview to the US Embassy? Well, first, take verifiable documentation of your sponsor's proof of income. Also, you may want to include proof of their fixed assets such as land, building, and property. In addition, you must take a loan sanction document to demonstrate that an education loan has been sanctioned. If you're applying without an education loan, take proof of funds covering at least 1 year's full expenses. Finally, take your income tax returns. This is the best way to demonstrate that your sponsor has a viable income. Now let's talk about the financial documentation for Canada. If you're applying for Student Direct Stream or SDS, include 1 year's tuition payment receipt at the time of applying for a visa. In addition to this, include your guaranteed investment certificate for Canadian dollars 10,000, along with 1 year's tuition payments receipts and your GIC. Also include concrete proof of your sponsor's proof of income. Also include documents that verify that your sponsor has fixed assets such as land, building, and property. If you have taken an education loan, include the loan sanction letter or include proof of funds such as a bank statement with at least more than 1 year's full expenses as the closing balance. Finally, make sure to include your income tax returns. Now, let's talk about financial documentation for the regular study permit. Include proof of payment of 6 months tuition at the DLI you have applied to. A GIC or guaranteed investment certificate is not mandatory for the regular study permit. However, it is preferable if you include this too. Along with these, in your regular study permit application, include proof of your sponsor's proof of income. Along with that, make sure you include your sponsor's proof of assets, such as land, property, and building. If you've taken an education loan, make sure you include the loan sanction letter. If not, include a bank statement with a good transactional history and a closing balance with more than 1 year's full expenses. Lastly, make sure you have your sponsor's income tax returns. Next, let's talk about financial documentation for the UK. At the time of applying for a student visa, you must have a whole list of financial documentation that we at Study Unifies recommend. Firstly, if you've taken an education loan, make sure you include the education loan sanction letter. If not, include your bank statement with a closing balance of more than 1 full year's expenses for at least 28 days. In addition, you can also include documents that demonstrate your sponsor's proof of income. Make sure to include documentation about your sponsor's fixed assets. Also, include your sponsor's income tax returns. Next, let's talk about the financial documentation for Australia. In the first stage, when you're applying for an unconditional admission letter or a COE, you will have to show certain financial documentation. We recommend that you take an educational loan for the various benefits that accrue to this. If you have an education loan, make sure you include the education loan sanction letter or a bank statement with a balance that is in excess of 1 year's full expenses. In addition to this, include your sponsor's proof of income and proof of fixed assets. You can also include your sponsor's income tax returns. Lastly, let's talk about financial documentation for your application to New Zealand. When you're applying for a student visa, first, include an education loan sanction letter or a bank statement. Also include your sponsor's proof of income and proof of fixed assets. Finally, make sure you include your sponsor's income tax returns. Once your New Zealand visa has been approved in principle, pay the fees for 1 year and then submit a receipt to get your visa. Now, some very general guidelines as far as financial documentation to all countries is concerned. Do not include unverifiable documentation, especially unverifiable business registrations. Also, do not include employment letters that are unverifiable, which are usually from small companies. With regard to bank statements, use only statements from nationalized banks, not from cooperative finances or post offices or banks that are not accredited. Mutual funds are extremely volatile. It is recommended that you do not include them in your documentation. Agricultural income is also unverifiable and therefore not given any importance by case officers in embassies worldwide. Finally, property sales receipts are generally treated as unverifiable. It is recommended that you do not include them in your application. Next, let's talk a little bit in detail about how to show your sponsor's proof of income. If your sponsor is employed, show his salary statement along with his income tax returns. If your sponsor is an entrepreneur, make sure to include the business registration, the business tax payment receipts for the last financial year. Next, let's talk in more detail about documentation you will need to demonstrate your sponsor's fixed assets. Include property ownership deeds. Include documentation that pertains to machinery and equipment in factories and workshops. You may also include intangibles like patents, copyrights, trademarks, and software licenses. If your sponsor has property on lease, make sure you include the leasehold agreement. Next, some general guidelines on proof of education loan or proof of funds. Make sure that your education loan sanction letter is from a national bank, not from a smaller institution, especially cooperative finances. If you're showing a bank statement, make sure the closing balance is clearly in excess of 1 year's full expenditure. Also, have a close look at the transactional history. Sudden large deposits are usually not looked at favorably by case officers. Thanks for watching this video. For more videos like this, like, share and subscribe to kickstart your financial planning and your journey to an international education. Register at studyunifees.io.